Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Once again, I wanted to discuss the situation in Gaza. There have been new developments. Well, I suppose there are new developments all the time, but this is a new development. So I wanted to discuss it a bit and hopefully get some feedback from you as well. The situation to me seems rather confusing in terms of what Israel is doing right now. What I'm trying to figure out is whether the latest moves by Israel are a response to what Joseph Biden and Bibi Netanyahu talked about over the phone, or whether this is something that is totally unrelated. Because on the one hand, Bibi Netanyahu is still talking about total victory. I have no idea what that means in Gaza. I mean, when you're talking about a country with nuclear powers, what else can that country achieve but total victory? Nothing else seems reasonable to me. So they're talking about total victory, and yet they are at the same time withdrawing troops from southern Gaza. Why is that? Beats me. I can't figure it out. I assume someone knows. Maybe Benjamin Netanyahu himself, maybe Joseph Biden, members of both of their regimes, perhaps. I don't know. But I will read you all or portions of this article from CNN and see if you can perhaps make sense out of it, because honestly, I cannot. So I will put on my spectacles once again and read you from the article by CNN. The Israeli military said it has withdrawn its ground forces from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza after months of fierce fighting. The Israel Defense Forces said on Sunday that its 98th Division had concluded its mission in Khan Yunis. The division was leaving the Gaza Strip to recuperate and prepare for future operations. Well, I think that there gives you some indication of what's going on. There is no end of operations. There is simply a pause. And the pause is to recover, to recoup, and then to go back in and, I assume, continue what they have been doing so far, or perhaps to advance it even further by adding additional missions to the ones it has already undertaken. Continuing, the IDF added that a significant force led by the 162nd Division and the Nahal Brigade continues to operate in the Gaza Strip and will preserve the IDF's freedom of action and its ability to conduct precise intelligence-based operations. A CNN team along the border, where troops enter and leave Gaza, has not yet seen large troops of Israelis' IDF forces withdraw, but it has seen a large number of tanks pull out of Khan Yunis overnight. They are now stationed on the border of Gaza and Israel. I don't know. That doesn't sound very optimistic to me. And an Israeli brigade typically has roughly a few thousand troops, but it remains unclear precisely how many Israeli troops have withdrawn from Gaza. Pause there for a moment. Is it unclear? or have there been restrictions placed on CNN and other news operations as to what they can and cannot say? We know that has been true in the recent past, and I assume it is still the case. Those kinds of restrictions are generally what we see in totalitarian and authoritarian regimes, not in democracies as Israel claims to be. So I am not sure what to make of this statement by CNN. Do I accept it on face value? Well, no. I never accept anything on face value, nor should anyone. But that doesn't mean I think necessarily that something is going on behind the scenes. That would be a conspiracy theory. In other words, I try to be skeptical, but at the same time, I try to look for evidence and to make my conclusions based on evidence, not on skepticism or cynicism or belief in some wider conspiracy. Because generally, there are no wider conspiracies. You see what's going on with your own eyes. You watch what troops are doing. You don't need to look behind the scenes that much. It's pretty obvious what's happening. Israel desires to take over Gaza. That's its objective. And immediately, it wants to transfer Gazans into Egypt. And apparently, for some reason that I can't honestly figure out, Egypt, after saying no for a long time, has finally agreed to Israel's demands. Why? Why? What advantage, what benefit does Egypt gain from going along with what Israel says? I don't see it. If you are as old as I am, 68, or close to it, or maybe even a bit younger, you remember when Israel and Egypt were mortal enemies. They are not mortal enemies anymore. I'm not sure if I would go as far as saying that they are allies, but they are certainly not enemies. They cooperate with one another on a wide range of missions. So who knows? Again, from a story like this, trying to read between the lines to figure out exactly what is happening is a virtual impossibility. Continuing. As of January, the 98th Division was the military's biggest ever division, as it was specifically bolstered to fight Hamas in Khan Yunis. Lieutenant General Herzl Haveli said at a news conference Sunday, the military is far from stopping its operations in the Gaza Strip following the withdrawal. See, just as I said, this is not an end to operations. The headline is really misleading. Withdrawing troops without explaining what that means. What it means is basically nothing. It indicates that Israel is trying to get stronger, perhaps to give its troops some rest, maybe, I don't know. But certainly this is not an end to the Israeli war on Gaza, not by any means. And anyone who thinks otherwise is simply wrong. And I wish that the headline was more accurate than what it is. But there's not much that one can expect from CNN or any other major news source these days, whether they are even entitled to be called news sources. In my view, is questionable. And I say that as somebody who started out university with an ABJ, a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism degree. I never actually worked in journalism per se, although I did work for newspapers in college. I also worked for three radio stations as a news reporter, but I really don't think that is enough to qualify me as having a real background in journalism. I think I would need to have done more than that, but that's just my own feeling. Maybe it's my humility, but if it is, it's not intentional, meaning I'm not intentionally trying to be humble, I'm trying to be accurate. We will not leave any Hamas brigades active in any part of the Gaza Strip, as the article continues. We have plans and will act when we decide. So mysterious, isn't it? I love that mystery, don't you? Adding that the military's goals in Gaza have not been fully achieved, including the return of all hostages, the return of displaced residents to the north, and the dismantling of Hamas throughout Gaza. Pause. The return of all hostages. How intriguing. I would call the residents of Gaza to be hostages. And I think that would be an accurate assessment. They are literally prisoners of the Israeli regime. So what about Israel freeing its own hostages in Gaza and allowing them to go wherever they want, including into so-called Israel? But it's not willing to do that. It wants its own so-called hostages returned to itself. It doesn't care about Gaza. It never has. It cares about itself and its own imperialist regime. We will not leave any Hamas brigades active in any part of the Gaza Strip. We have plans and will act when we decide, adding that the military's goals in Gaza have not been fully achieved, including the return of all hostages, the return of displaced residents to the north, and the dismantling of Hamas throughout all of Gaza. In response to a question about the effect of the military's withdrawal on ground forces from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, Halevi said, the military wing of Hamas is deterred. The vast majority of its battalions are dismantled and have lost their capabilities. That military framework, which had many capabilities, is currently running as small terrorist cells. There's that word terrorist again. Hamas is not and never has been a terrorist organization. Hamas is a liberation movement representing the interests of the Gazans. Now, does that mean that I agree with the ideology of Hamas? No. I am not an Islamist or in Arabic, a proponent of Islamia. I do not believe in the establishment of an Islamic state. But by the same token, I don't believe in the establishment of a Jewish state either, which is precisely what Israel is. So what right does Israel have to condemn Hamas for running what it calls small terrorist cells when Israel itself is operating on the basis of relatively large terrorist cells. So it's like the pot calling the kettle black. That's exactly what I see in this story. I wish that these journalists were more critical. I really do. Maybe they can't be. Maybe they're under orders from their editors, the publisher, who knows? From Israel, for all I know. But regardless, if I were asked to write a story which referred to Hamas as small terrorist cells, even if I'm quoting a general, I don't care. I might quote him, but then put in a note saying, why is Israel calling Hamas small terrorist cells? It has no right to do that. Or at least point out that Israel itself is a terrorist state, the Zionist terrorist state. But of course not. You're not going to find that coming from a mainstream news source. It simply won't happen. That is not the way in which the news media works. Not when it comes to Israel, not when it comes to the US, when it comes to Hamas, yes. When it comes to Russia, yes. When it comes to China, yes, but not when it comes to the US and Israel. Those countries have a special prerogative. They are treated as privileged. They have a right, supposedly, to do what they're doing. They have a right to engage in terrorism. But when it comes to Hamas, oh, of course not. Of course not. They can't be freedom fighters. You can't have Palestinian freedom fighters because, by definition, if they are fighting for freedom, that's right, they are terrorist cells. That is the hypocrisy that I see in almost every story that is written about the Zionist entity and Hamas and Gaza, is that there is total inconsistency. The way in which Israel is talked about when it engages in its military actions, and the way in which Gaza is treated when it engages in theirs, is not the same. They are treated as two entirely different activities. They are not equated with each other. They are not judged by each other at all. Never, never. It simply doesn't happen. And what happens frequently to reporters who violate that will, I assume many of you know this, they get fired. That's right, they get fired. They are expected to toe the line. And if they don't toe the line, that's it. They are simply out. Continuing. Halevi reiterated that the IDF has not left the Gaza Strip and that there are many troops at this very hour in the Strip. This is a long war. We can't maintain the same extent of troop deployment, he said, adding, many achievements are yet to come on our way to the victory. Achievements? Why not call those slaughters? That's what they are. They're slaughters of innocent civilians. But no, according to Halevi, they're not slaughters at all. They're achievements. It is their land. The Gazan people are the indigenous inhabitants of that area, just like the Native Americans were indigenous inhabitants of their lands as well. In most cases, when reservations were created for those Native Americans, those reservations were placed in different places than their traditional lands were located. In other words, there was no respect shown by the US government for the land of the Native Americans. No respect at all. It is unclear what the withdrawal means for Israel's plans to invade Rafah, the southernmost part of Gaza that has become a shelter for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Israel has said an incursion into Rafah is essential to achieve its goal of eliminating Hamas from Gaza. That is a contradiction. Why? Because Israel uses the terms Hamas and Gaza interchangeably. We know that because after Israel kills babies in incubators, it talks about that as a Hamas attack. Babies in incubators cannot be Hamas soldiers. So what some people have actually had the gall to say is, well, maybe not yet, but they will be in the future. Total and complete hypocrisy. So when Israel talks about Hamas, it is talking about Gaza. Likewise, when Israel talks about Gaza, it is talking about Hamas. There is really no meaningful distinction between those two different entities in the minds of the rulers of the Zionist entity. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Sunday that the troops were leaving Israel to prepare for follow-up missions, including in the Rafah region. We are reaching a situation where Hamas does not control the Gaza Strip and that it does not function as a military framework that poses a risk to the citizens of the state of Israel. What about a risk to the citizens of Gaza? Does that not matter? That's what I'm talking about. There is no respect. There's no respect at all that is given to people who live in Gaza. They have no right to defend themselves, but Israelis, of course, do have a right to defend themselves. There is no consistency at all in what is being said by the leaders of the Zionist entity. The defense minister added that Israeli forces in Khan Yunis were successful in destroying enemy targets, warehouses, weapons, underground infrastructure, headquarters, and communication rooms. Israeli public broadcaster and CNN affiliate Channel 11 on Sunday reported that the remaining forces would be located along the so-called Netzarim corridor, a route that splits the Gaza Strip in two, named after the former Israeli settlement of Netzraim in Gaza. The corridor intersects one of Gaza's two main north-south roads, Salhadin Street, to create a strategic central junction. Before pulling out, the IDF on Sunday said that the commando units had raided and searched more than 100 locations in the Al Amal neighborhood of Khan Yunis. where it found a long tunnel and eliminated terrorists. CNN cannot independently verify these claims. Comment. Almost every major country in the world, including Israel, including the United States, has tunnels, has an underground infrastructure. The name that is given to that in the United States is continuity of government. If you go underground in certain places, there are bases there, and there are train lines, high-speed train lines that connect one base to another. Is that a secret? No, but nobody talks about it. It's there. There's a way to enter into it from the White House. It's a very, very well-known place or network of places. And yet nobody complains that the United States has its deep underground military places. Nobody complains about that, at least not in the US. But when Israel finds similar tunnels in Gaza, oh, we need to dismantle them. What about dismantling the huge, and I mean huge, network of tunnels that exists in Israel? I mean, tunnels are a necessity. Say there is an NBC war, nuclear, biological, chemical war. There will be a need, obviously, for continuity of government. And that's why those tunnels, that's why those underground bases exist, to allow whatever government governs that place to continue in some form or another. There are all these ridiculous conspiracy theories surrounding them, and they should be completely dismissed. The creation of those tunnels is perfectly logical, and there is no reason why anybody should question their existence. They're there for a reason that everyone knows, because if you live in a country, you want to make sure that your country will exist in the event of some type of NBC attack. That's why those tunnels are there. But when it comes to the Gazans, when it comes to the Palestinians, the answer is no. We can have those tunnels, but you cannot. Speaking to ABC's This Week, White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby said it was unlikely the move was a sign of some incoming new operation, but rather a rest and refit. I agree with that. They've been on the ground for 4 months. The word we're getting is they're tired. They need to be refit. Yes, I think that's true as well. The US is Israel's major ally, but has been putting pressure on the country to do more to protect civilians and to allow in aid, humanitarian aid, in other words. In a call this week between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu, Biden told Netanyahu to take steps to address the crisis or face consequences. Are you scared yet, Bibi Netanyahu? I wouldn't be. If I were Bibi Netanyahu, the last thing I would be is scared. Because Biden can say what he wants. The fact that he has repeated again and again and again that he is a Zionist, that he supports the quote-unquote right of Israel to exist on stolen land. Well, of course, he doesn't include the stolen land part. Tells you that he is not somebody that can be trusted by people like me, who oppose Israel, who support Gaza and the Palestinians and the rest of the third world. That is what I support. And so, no, I simply do not believe what this says. Take steps to address this crisis or face consequences. BS. BS. I try to avoid swearing, so I use abbreviations whenever possible. The IDF began its campaign against Hamas in Gaza's north soon after the October 7th attacks that killed about 1,200 people. And how many people has Israel killed? A lot more than that. I guess they don't count. Continuing. Early in the war, the Israeli military designated Khan Yunis as a safer zone and told residents from northern Gaza to seek shelter there. And then what happened? Israel bombed it. Because that's what Israel does. You can't trust the Israeli regime. Whatever they say is likely to be a lie. Is likely, in my view. And I realize I'm biased, but is likely to be a lie. But as the IDF increasingly switched its focus to the south, the city became a battleground. On December 1st, the Israeli military launched a massive air raid operation on Khan Yunis, dropping leaflets into the city, telling residents to immediately evacuate. Since then, it has been a site of intense fighting, leaving the area devastated. Visiting the scene earlier in the year, CNN found buildings completely destroyed or others beyond repair. Well, at least CNN is being honest there. The IDF says the city is a Hamas stronghold, adding that the tunnel network underneath civilian buildings in the city was likely where the Hamas planned the October 7th attacks from. The city is the hometown of Hamas leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar. Hamas has denied hiding in hospitals and other civilian structures, and CNN cannot independently confirm or verify either claim. And that is the end of the article. Comments. My suggestion again, do not believe anything, and I mean anything, that Israel says. They are not a reliable source. Remember when CNN had a TV show called Reliable Sources? Not sure if that show is on anymore. But I used to wonder, what is CNN basing its concept of reliable sources on, especially since CNN itself was generally not a reliable source itself? Anyway, this entire situation is breaking my heart. Honestly, I don't wish any harm on you. I don't wish you to be devastated by this. I really don't. But I hope that you feel the pain of this situation in your heart, like I do. Not necessarily to the same degree. As a communist, as a Maoist third worldist, as somebody from a Jewish family, I feel a lot of pain. Although I am not and never have been a Zionist, I still feel a sense of responsibility for what the Zionists are doing. When I was a kid, no, I was not a Zionist. but I really wasn't anything. That is because I honestly had no opinion on Israel. I did not know anything about the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. Were not really taught about that subject in Hebrew school. We were simply taught about the history of Israel being in the region, not about the fact that there were indigenous people in the land who had that same land stolen from beneath them. That was never told to us. So I wasn't a Zionist. I was not Bund back at that time. I am now. I am Bund now, very much Bund now. But back then, no, I wasn't a Zionist. I wasn't an anti-Zionist. I wasn't Bund, and I certainly was not a Zionist. I was a nothing. I was not a nothing burger, I guess, to use modern parlance. I really had no education in the subject, but as I began to become more informed about what Israel is doing in West Asia, how it is the country with the largest supply of nuclear weapons, perhaps the only country with nuclear weapons. At that point, I began to question, were the things I was told about Jews returning to the Holy Land, were they based in fact? Later, I found out, no, they are not based in fact at all. As I've said before, they are based on legends, on what is sometimes called sacred history, meaning narratives of the past that do not amount to anything that any reputable historian would consider to be historical. Sacred history, in other words, is history which, in effect, justifies a particular religion or justifies the use by that religion of a certain piece of land. In this case, the use of Israel by Gaza. As I learned that, as I became increasingly familiar with the abuses that the Zionist entity has leveled upon the Gazans and other Palestinians, I went from being, I guess you could say, agnostic, because I really had no particular view. I was not a Zionist. I was not an anti-Zionist. As a kid, I was a nothing. I had no knowledge at all about the situation. But as time went on, I very quickly, back in my 20s, became an anti-Zionist. It did not take long. And then I began to find out that there were some communists or alleged communists who were Zionists. I was completely appalled by that. How in the world, I thought, could a communist be a Zionist? And yet there are some, or at least they claim to be communists. The Zionist part, I don't question. If somebody says they're a Zionist, I assume they're not, because nobody who is not a Zionist would say that they are. That's like admitting that you committed a horrendous crime. No. So I don't think that a non-Zionist is likely to say, I am a Zionist. But for somebody to say I'm a communist, I assume must mean that they either are a communist or they think that they are a communist. So what do I do with that? How do I respond? that was one of the things which attracted me initially to Jason Unruh's channel, and I hope if you're not a subscriber that you become one. He is the one who introduced me to Maoism, Third Worldism. In all honesty, I had never heard of it before. Why? Well, because it's not that big. I mean, there aren't that many of us, realistically, in the world. We are not a huge communist movement. I wish we were, but most communists are first worlders. And that explains, I think, at least in part, why you can have a communist or somebody who says, I am a communist, who simultaneously supports Israel. It is a complete and utter tragedy, but in my view, it is a tragedy that can only be remedied by the end of the First World and by the rising up of certain regions. And what those regions are, I have no idea. Of certain regions of the Third World to fight revolutions, to fight against the bourgeoisie, to establish their countries as communist states. I hope that happens eventually. Is it guaranteed? As I've said many times here, no. Nothing in the future is guaranteed. We might destroy ourselves before then. In fact, we're heading on that road right now through climate change. So we can't be certain that there will be revolutions initially in the Third World, but we can work for it. We can make that our priority. We can set that as a goal. We can orient our conscientization, our critical conscience and consciousness raising to the establishment or to the development of a revolutionary consciousness in the Third World. So I hope if you are not a Maoist Third Worldist, perhaps you're another kind of communist, say a First Worldist, that you will at least consider the points made by Maoism, Third Worldism. Better to listen to Jason Unruh than to me, or Comrade Red Nicole. Both of them are much more knowledgeable on Maoism, Third Worldism than I am. I'm gradually getting there. I'm becoming more knowledgeable all the time, but there is no way that I would place myself on their levels. So please consider that. You are free to write me about it, leave me a message in the text, and we can arrange to chat with each other about it. I'm always willing and happy to discuss Maoism, Third Worldism with people. And there are a lot of books on the subject, including one that I am writing now. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.